Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be the History Channel's UFO hunter, Bill Birnes. And we're going to talk about a couple of his books that he's got coming out in the near future. The Everything UFO book and The Haunting of 20th Century America. Now, I had him on the phone a few minutes ago and he needed to go out to the car and get his headphones. So I decided to go ahead and start the show and call him back. If you'll give me a moment, I will try to call him back now and add him to the conversation. Well, I think I almost called the wrong things. Folks, just give me a minute. Well, Bill, are you there? Okay, well, I see my picture, but I don't see him. And that's Redneck Radio Man. Well, maybe I do have to call them straight from the phones. Let me try that one more time. Ah, wait a minute, I got it.
Hello.
Hello, Bill. This is Royce again. And I just thought I'd let you know real quick that I went ahead and started the show and I did the introduction and I told everybody I was calling you, so we're live now and I thought you might like to know that.
That's always good to know. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, I can. You sound really great.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Now, Bill,
well, it's really a pleasure to be with you on a Saturday afternoon.
I was just fixing to tell you it was a pleasure to have you here. I can't tell you how many times I watched you on UFO Hunters on the History Channel, and I thought about contacting you. And, I mean, I've known you've been the publisher over at UFO Magazine for a long time, but I never went over there and actually, hit the link until just the other day, or just when I contacted you. And I don't know why, other than the fact I just have a lot of guests coming and going on this show, and, well, you know how, time gets to be. So
yes, time just slip away. It does indeed.
Well, and I know you was telling me in an email the other day when I contacted you, you have two books out now, the new ones, the Everything UFO book and the Haunting of 20th Century America, which that one took me by surprise because I'd always associated you with UFOs, and I said, well, there's another side to Bill I didn't know existed. He's also into ghosts.
Well, believe it or not, the Haunting of America series, which is really a 4-book series. I mean, it's spread over two different publishers. It may even be 3 different publishers next year, but it's spread over different publishers. And really, the whole premise about it is a history book. It's a history series. It's the history of the United States of America and the history of the presidency, told from the premise of the paranormal. That's the whole premise of the series. I mean, so, you could think about things like, the history of George Washington at Valley Forge, or the history of Abraham Lincoln, But then suddenly you come across these really weird stories of Abraham Lincoln being very precognitive. Abraham Lincoln was a psychic. He was also bipolar. He had a mental disease, but he was very psychic and fatalistic. And it's almost as though he knew that he was going to be assassinated and really walked in and sat for it, knowing that he'd had a whole premonition of his death. Grant's wife, President Grant's wife, because then it was General Grant's wife, was also precognitive, and she demanded, General Grant and his wife were supposed to be in the same box at Ford Theater with Mr. and Mrs. Lincoln, with Abraham and Sarah Todd Lincoln, and what happened was Grant's wife said, no, you have to go to New York. You will not be in Washington that night. And so she spirited her husband away to New York City, and that was the night that John Wilkes Booth broke into Lincoln. He didn't have to break into Lincoln's box. It was unguarded. He crept into Lincoln's box and shot him. And somehow Grant's wife knew there was going to be an attack that night. And so that's why she was absolutely adamant that Grant couldn't be there. So, I mean, it's really strange. I mean, on the one hand, Lincoln was a great politician, by the way, a brilliant politician. He was a brilliant politician who understood. I mean, he would have been, in many ways, Lincoln was the Mitt Romney of his day. You know, people claim, oh, Mitt Romney, he'll shift positions this way and shift positions that way. Well, what was so funny was Abraham Lincoln ran on a platform of non-interference, and he was the first Republican president we ever had, and he ran on a platform of states' rights, believe it or not. He ran on a platform which basically said that the Union would be preserved because there would be no interference with the Southern plantation economy. However, there would be no more slave states. So although he was anti-slavery, and his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, came from a slave-holding family, they basically were status quo people. The Republican platform is not to interfere with the South, but there'll be no new slave states in the Union, which was expanding. Well, one of the things that happened was that as early as 1820, 40 years before the Lincoln campaign, the South Carolina was leading the charge for something called disunion. South Carolina wanted to secede from the Union and was trying to get the other states in the area to secede, and their campaign lasted for 40 years until South Carolina simply fired on Fort Sumter, and that began the Civil War. But Lincoln actually tried to keep the Union together on a campaign not to interfere with the South. And when the time came for the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln had absolutely a whole bunch of qualms about signing it. Not because he didn't think it was right. He knew that it was the right thing to do, but he said, I ran on a platform of non-interference. That was the Republican platform in 1860, was running on a platform of non-intervention in the South. And here I am signing something which basically was outlawing something on a federal level that would have interfered with the southern states. Well, in order to, Lincoln was working with, he had hired a medium, a trance channeler by the name of Nettie Colburn to come to the White House and basically contact the spirit world. Because one of the spirits that he wanted to contact was his son, Willie Lincoln, who died of typhus fever, probably because the White House water system was completely compromised with wastewater, and Willie Lincoln died in the White House. And Mary Todd Lincoln, who was clinically depressed, by the way, would not leave her bedroom. I mean, here's the first lady who would not leave. She was too depressed. So what Lincoln did was he hired Nettie Coburn to contact the spirit of Willie Lincoln, who assured his mother during a seance, this is all documented stuff, who assured his mother during a seance that he was fine on the other side and not to worry and live life. Well, Lincoln contacted that same psychic to put him in touch in the spirit world with somebody who would advise him on the Emancipation Proclamation. So the person that Nettie Coburn contacted was the spirit of the great orator Daniel Webster, right? You know the play The Devil and Daniel Webster? It was Daniel Webster. And Daniel Webster really said to Lincoln, you have to sign this proclamation. It's the only way to keep the Union together. And that's what he did. So, I mean, it's so strange. You'll never read that in a history book, right?
Right.
And all you read is Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation to free the slaves in the South. Actually, he didn't want to sign it. He was afraid of signing it. He ran on a platform against freeing the slaves. And really what the Emancipation Proclamation did was it simply conferred those slaves to the Union Army in the hope that they would rise up and become another arm of the Union Army. So nobody will ever write about the fact that it was a psychic who encouraged Lincoln to sign the Emancipation Proclamation. But that's what happened. Or nobody will ever write about the fact that when George Washington was demoralized at Valley Forge, he had an otherworldly experience. He had two otherworldly
I read about that.
Yeah, one was with an otherworldly creature, some call it an angel, some call it a spirit, who showed George Washington the future of the United States of America and what the country would face and look like in its ultimate triumph in the war against England. And that's what bucked up Washington. He told his staff they survived that terrible winter of 1777 and went on, obviously, to defeat the British and to win the war. So that was one. And then Washington came back as a ghost in 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg, 1864 at the Battle of Gettysburg, and he led the Union, a unit of the Maine Regiment, MAINE, the state of Maine, that were kind of surrounded on a hill called Little Round Top in Pennsylvania, just outside of Gettysburg. They were surrounded by one of the elements of General Pickett, Pickett's famous charge, and they ran out of ammunition. And if they had surrendered, or if they had basically been overwhelmed by the Confederates, that was a strategic hill that Pickett had to take. Well, Washington appeared on the hill in a white horse and a white three-cornered hat, drew his sword, and led the Maine regiment, the Maine volunteers, down the hill. They had no ammunition. They just fixed bayonets into this hail of bullets from the Confederate Army, and they basically broke the Confederate Army's charge. They counterattacked and sent them running. Well, that blunted Pickett's charge, which then failed, and the Confederates said they never wanted to fight those Union guys again because they were so crazy, and they were led, believe it or not, by the ghost of George Washington. And that story of the strange figure on a white horse that really couldn't be identified wound up in the after-battle report because the colonel of that regiment, the Maine Volunteers, became the president of Bowdoin College and later on the governor of Maine and one of the assistant secretaries of the Army. He wrote that in the official Army report.
Okay. Now, I was going to mention to you, a couple of folks in the chat room said that you sounded like maybe you were a little close to your mic, but your volume was down low, and it, you was kind of blared there, in other words, so I thought I would mention that. But also I was going to say that was some very interesting information that you had in that book about the presidents. I think almost everybody wants to know more about hauntings in the White House. you see an occasional show about it on the History Channel and maybe on another documentary here or there, but there's very little, in-depth information on the TV about it, and most of it you have to either look up online or find it in a library. And I realize you also got that other book to talk about, but since we did start on the 20th century America, the haunting of 20th century America, why don't we talk about also the fact that I don't know if it's in the book or not, I haven't read it, but does your book go into any depth about how many different presidents did go through seances and things of that nature? Because I heard that that there was a lot of occult action in the early presidency.
Oh, yes, for sure. And it was not just the early presidents. There was Washington, there was Adams, there was Thomas Jefferson. In fact, Thomas Jefferson's really funny. Thomas Jefferson actually presented a case of UFO contact to the American Academy of Philosophy all the way back in 1801. And the stunning thing about that is not so much, people were abducted by UFOs. It wasn't one of those. It was a case where there'd been a report of a UFO landing or a contact in Tennessee, someplace in the South. And this was a case where the Vice President of the United States, Jefferson was Vice President, the Vice President of the United States made that report to the American Academy of Philosophy. Was at that time, it was almost like the American version of the Royal Academy of Science. It was a very prestigious, an extraordinarily prestigious body of scholars. And Jefferson made that report to them as if it were true. So can you imagine the highest federal official in history making that report all the way back at the very beginning of the 19th century? I think that's astounding. And of course, other presidents had their own, Ronald Reagan used a medium, Joan Quigley, who was an astrologer, and she conducted all the affairs of the White House in terms of scheduling. And that was stunning. In fact, when Vice President Bush found out about it, he was completely stunned that the entire administration was being run by a medium, by an astrologer. He was flabbergasted. And when people think, Ronald Reagan, he came from La La Land, he was, from Los Angeles and stuff. He wasn't the only one. The other person was current Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who, as the dark forces gathered around Bill Clinton, they want, to impeach him. Hillary Clinton went to another medium called Jean Houston to get her to channel the spirit of Eleanor Roosevelt to help her husband Bill Clinton to withstand what was going on with those people who were after him on the right wing. So it was, whether you believe it or not, whether you agree or not, that was literally one of the things that Hillary Clinton did. So even into the 1990s, what you were seeing was a whole bunch of paranormal activity inside the White House. In the 1950s, President Eisenhower saw Lincoln's ghost, and Eisenhower was so surprised at seeing Lincoln's ghost standing on the second floor of the White House that he walked over to the spot where Lincoln's ghost was standing. And there he noticed something strange on the White House floor. Didn't figure out what it was, so he called the building engineer, and sure enough, the White House was in a state of collapse. The building had begun to sag. The White House was built on a swamp. So this was a case where all of Washington D.C. is built on a swamp. And so the White House was collapsing. The foundation was collapsing. And they found out that it was collapsing because of a ghostly appearance of President Lincoln in the spot where it was noticeable on the floor. The floor was separating from the wall. So the Eisenhowers had to close the White House, the Eisenhowers moved out of the White House, and they all went to, I think, Blair House, where their business was conducted until the White House was shorn up. And that story appeared in magazines back in the 1950s. So again, documented story. And what's so funny was that in a recent appearance on the Colbert Report on the Comedy Channel, Julie Nixon Eisenhower and David Eisenhower, right? They told the story of ghosts in the White House and how all the presidents saw ghosts. And I thought that was astounding that was actually, and of course Colbert had no answer to that. What could Colbert say when the grandson of one president and the daughter of another president were talking about ghosts in the White House? So the whole history of the White House from its very beginning all the way through the 1990s were replete with stories of trance-channelers, mediums, ghostly invocations, Ouija boards, and actual spiritual manifestations.
But this just wasn't put out in the public domain to air the laundry then, right?
It never appeared in the domain, but anybody who wants to read about one president's own diary of seeing ghosts in the White House, just go online and type in, go to the website of President Truman's diary. His diary is online. Don't handwrite it. It's put up there by the Truman Library in Missouri, and Truman writes that he's actually seen the ghost of President Pierce. President Pierce, of course, was the ancestor of Barbara Pierce, who's Barbara Bush, President George W. Bush's mom, and he sees the ghost of Franklin Pierce, and he saw the ghost of James Buchanan, President Buchanan, at the White House. And he heard the footsteps of President Lincoln walking near the family quarters. And this is from President Harry Truman.
Okay. Now, a part of what you had just said was hard to make out. I think it was the part about the name of the president that you my listeners want to Google. Can you something in the background seemed to bleed through and kind of override it, in other words?
Yeah, it's Harry Truman, President Truman.
Okay. The Diary of Harry Truman. I got you.
Yep.
All right.
It's on the internet. Google it, pull it up, and you will see President Truman's own story of ghosts in the White House. And he's a witness.
Okay. Now, before we run out of time, though, I also wanted to talk to you about the Everything UFO book. I know that I've had guests on here like Colin Wilson who covered the UFOs over the White House. I don't know if that's going to be in your UFO book.
It is. It's a big story in the UFO book, not only because of the UFOs over the White House, right? It's the story of how the head of Project Blue Book, Edward Ruppelt, really fessed up. He owned up to his experience during those weekends in July 1952 when UFOs appeared over the White House, and how General Sanford, the head of Air Force Intelligence, actually told the press that the stories weren't true. But Ruppelt investigated. He was there at the Pentagon. He knew for a fact that our jets were intercepting UFOs over Washington, D.C., and the UFOs were breaking the radar line and speeding away. So he knew that. And he wrote about that and then said that the government basically covered the whole thing up.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a question. Are you by any chance outside on your cell phone?
Yes.
Okay, that explains an awful lot. One minute you sound clear, another minute you hear wind, another minute it sounds like a ham radio. So I thought maybe there was background noise going on.
I'm back inside now, if that makes it any clearer.
Okay, I'm sorry, Bill. I couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I just thought that might have been the case. But, yeah, I talked to Colin at some length about that. That was a very interesting story. But are there any other, UFO things that can, other than that one in 1952 that ever happened at the White House? I'm just curious.
Well, first of all, another big story was the evidence of UFO appearances over Niagara Falls in November 1965, because that was the precursor to the big Northeast blackout in November 1965. So that also was really a big thing. And the president who was involved in that was Lyndon Johnson. In fact, there were 2 UFO incidents in 1965 that he was involved in. One was UFOs, one was the big Northeast power blackout with a flying saucer over Niagara Falls, which was the big power generating station. That was the beginning of the collapse of the Northeast power grid that threw the entire Northeast into total darkness for just about 24 hours. And the other was this appearance of a strange object over Kecksburg, Pennsylvania in December 1965, which also galvanized everybody at the White House, alerted everybody at the White House over this thing, because they didn't know what it was, and they were really freaked out by this whole thing. So in 2 cases, Lyndon Johnson was personally involved in this, and partly he was so concerned because he thought the Soviets were involved in what was going on, and basically called one of his military liaison people, somebody he thoroughly trusted, to see if he could figure out what was going on and were the Soviets involved. Because I will tell you that at that point, we were very concerned that we were going to war in 1965.
Hang on just a second, sir. I apologize. I'm getting a frog.
Okay.
It's that time of year over here down in the south where I'm at by Houston. You get that pollen in the air, and then all of a sudden you have to cough. You know what I mean?
I know.
But at any rate, yeah. What else do you go into in this UFO book? Have you got kind of like a guide in there for people to help them know what kind of equipment's best to use for getting UFO pictures and that sort of thing?
Yes, that's exactly the case. In the final chapters, what we do is we go into, if you want to do your own UFO hunting, this is the equipment you'll need, and here are the steps you have to take, and here are the things you should watch out for. I mean, one of the things that I really suggest in the book, and I make very clear, is that if you think that going UFO hunting means you can trespass on other people's property, or trespass on government property, or go hang around Area 51 and think it's really cool because you're just a UFO person, let me tell you, those are the wrong things to do. So we give a lot of those caveats. We also said that if you're going to go with a group of people to go UFO hunting, make sure you really have walkie-talkies. They're not expensive. You can get small-range walkie-talkies just to stay in contact, because in some of these places where you're going to be looking for UFOs, I have to tell you, you're going to be out of cell phone contact. So, there's no cell phone service out there. You go out in the desert someplace. So my advice is, if you've got to talk to friends, get yourself a couple of walkie-talkies and communicate that way, and make sure that the camera you have isn't just a cell phone camera, because you're going to be very unhappy with the kinds of photos you get from cameras that really don't have a good depth of field, tend to over-focus and defocus at long distance, really can't pick up on a night shutter. They can't distinguish between regular light and ambient light and things like that. I mean, there are a whole bunch of things that you find out the hard way when you go to look at the kinds of photos, when you pull up the digital photos that you've taken and find out, wow, you know, I'm really in a lot of trouble here because I didn't capture anything. So also one of the things that we suggest in that book is to bring along a walk, just for yourself, a little really mini voice recorder. You know, they're very inexpensive. Bring one that has a USB connect to your computer, because in some cases you're going to forget some of the events that are happening as they're happening, because this phenomenon that happens, you know, to spot some UFOs, one of the phenomenon that happens is it's called awe, and you tend to find yourself so awed by what you're looking at that you forget some of the details of the event. So if as you recording your voice describing what you're seeing, that absolutely helps you remember some of the details.
Okay, now Bill, we just had a question in the chat room from Mayred. At any rate, she was saying she just saw the UFO hunters where y'all used the starchild skull and a reconstruction of the face to see if it could be a hybrid, and she wanted me to ask you about that. So,
sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's been a lot of new updates on the starchild skull. Some of it are pretty astounding, I have to say. In fact, on our own radio show, Future Theater, I kind of expect Lloyd Pye, we haven't confirmed it yet, but Lloyd Pye will be on the show, who's the person who's been the caretaker and the researcher of the starchild skull. And one of the things that he said, he's written to his group, is that they've been doing DNA tests on the starchild skull. And one DNA test that they've done, a recent one, showed that there is not one iota of human DNA in that skull. In other words, originally what Lloyd said is that there were 3 different types of DNA in the skull. One was human DNA, and that human DNA was in the part of the cell called the mitochondria. It's the ectoplasm in the cell around the nucleus. They identified that as human. He thought. Then, which meant that that creature was carried by a human mother, that somehow it was like in vitro fertilization, which of course there was no such thing 1,000 years ago as in vitro fertilization, so that was a mystery, right? And then one part of the DNA was human from the nucleus, and the other part was unidentified. Well, they ran the entire genome, because new technology makes recovering the genome far less expensive than it was 10 years ago. And what they found is that there is no human DNA, that the DNA that they recovered from genetic testing on that skull does not match any human group in the entire database of the National Institute of Health, which is the largest repository of human DNA in the world. And so how do you explain that? Here's a skull found in a cave in Mexico, looks oddly shaped, not fixed, just different shape, that has no human DNA in it. And that's what the latest news is on the starchild skull.
Okay. Now, I've had Lloyd on my show before, and I got to tell you, I lost contact with him for a little while there. And this kind of news to me. I know recently I also heard that Lloyd had come across some research work that had discovered that, it's somewhere I think in either the Y or the X chromosomes, there's 2 genes fused together that indicate that at some point in our genetic tree, somebody had actually fused in a different gene and put two together to come up with a hybrid, in other words, and we're really more of a hybrid.
That was one of the early things that he was writing about. And, of course, he was astonished because you have to realize that the age of this skull is such that you're talking about a technology that did not exist over 1,000 years ago. That's what's so weird about this thing. And so what he's saying is that there was some kind of genetic manipulation of the human species. And is that something that's ongoing to this day, as David Jacobs says? Or are there creatures on this planet whose DNA was manipulated thousands of years ago, and did they turn out to be us?
Okay, now, didn't you also have a part in the History Channel's Ancient Alien series with Giorgio Tsoukalos, if I remember correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought I remembered seeing you on that when me and my wife were watching it together. But that's kind of getting away from your book, unless, of course, somewhere in your UFO book you might have talked about the ancient alien theory.
I did. In Everything UFOs, we spent a few chapters talking about what I call anomalous archaeological history, which means that the history of certain archaeological features, architectural features, don't belong in the times where people believe they are, where they were in the places where they were discovered. Such as the big thing for me were the megalithic monuments. I mean, how did some of these megalithic huge blocks cut almost perfectly square so that they fit together? How did these things get there? I mean, there was no earth-moving equipment. There was no engineering equipment. That stuff just didn't exist all the way back 7,000 years ago. So if that's the case, how did these things get there? Who put them there? And really, what are they doing there? Like, what would motivate some of these prehistoric civilizations? What would motivate them to build these stones? In some cases, we could figure out that the stones aligned perfectly with various, with the solstice, with the appearance of certain stars. So one thought is that these things were ancient telescopic indicators. Another thought, of course, is that these things were literally stone calendars that would mark the distance from a sunrise or a sunset on various days to the appearance of certain stars. One star, of course, at least in the northern hemisphere, was the star Sirius, the dog star, right, in the dog constellation, Canis, because the whole point of a star like Sirius was that the appearance of that star, that predicted the onset of summer. And so let's just take the ancient Egyptians, for example, that are living in the Nile River Valley on the Nile floodplain. The appearance of certain stars predicted when the Nile would flood. Now, if you're an ancient civilization, you're not using, Scott's magic grow or fertilizer or things, right? What you're using as your fertilizer for your planting is the silt that's deposited by floods from the Nile. So here's an absolute case where what you need to do is you need to know when the Nile is going to flood for two basic reasons. What you want to do is get the hell out of there, right?
I would think so. Unless you wanted to swim.
Yeah, because there are floods coming your way. That's one. And two, you have to know when the planting season is going to start. So because basically that's how you grow your crops to feed that particular establishment, that particular encampment. So the appearance of the dog star meant that the Nile was soon going to flood, that summer was coming. That's why it's called the dog days of summer, by the way. That the Nile was going to flood, summer was coming. So get out of there. The Nile recedes. Plant whatever crops you're planting, your wheat basically, That's how the Egyptians were able to make it through all those famines when the rest of the area around Egypt was in famine. Egypt always had crops because they knew when the Nile was going to flood and recede. So that was important. So you see these ancient civilizations along the Euphrates, along the Ganges. What you see them doing is building these stone monuments that, and the same thing with the Maya, that are marking celestial events over the years, because these things predict when events are going to take place on Earth. The problem is some of these monuments are so huge, stones weighing many, many tons. How did they get there? Because when we look today at the kind of rock that these stones were, they had to have been quarried, and they had to have been quarried many, many miles away from where they wound up. And you look and you see, well, are there rivers? Could they have, they barges floated these stones? And the answer is no. Then you say, well, I know. They cut trees down. They cut down logs.
Yeah, I always had trouble with that explanation.
Yeah, me too. So, the bottom line is that if you can't figure out how these large megaliths got in place, and then once they're in place, I mean, it's one thing to say, oh, well, they dragged these things for 500 miles. Okay, fine. I'll concede that. I'll give you that. Okay? But look at it from this point of view. Once they're there, how did they set these things up to be in such perfect alignment? They had no instruments, right? They didn't have modern tools. There were no engineers. How did they lift them into place? How did the stones get there for the Nazca lines, for example? So that's some of the things we talk about in Ancient Aliens.
Yeah, now, one of the things that occurs to me is all the miles they had to transport these stones to build these pyramids and align them to Osiris, that sounds like an awful lot of trouble just to be able to keep up with the flooding of the Nile when there's easier ways. Wouldn't you think there had to be a more important reason than just that by itself?
Well, one of the things that the ancient alien theory talks about is that it wasn't just to keep calendars, but that in some cases, let's face it, this is a time before electric lights, before the power grid, right? So given that this is a time before that, how do the aliens know when, where to land? So were some of these things actual markers for the alien craft themselves to recognize where they were coming down? And that's another theory that the ancient alien folks talk about.
Now, another thing that I was listening to you on earlier, now I heard what you had said before, from other sources, in other words, about the dog store and using it to keep up with the Nile flooding and that. But right. I've always wondered, every time I've read or heard that, isn't that dog star kind of far away to have that kind of effect on our tides when the moon's even closer, and usually given credit for the effect on the tide?
Oh, no. The dog star didn't have effect on the tides. The whole point about the dog star was that the appearance of the dog star in the northern skies heralded the coming of summer.
Okay, I got you.
Okay, so for a civilization that really didn't have any calendars, right, they had no stopwatches or timepieces, the only timepiece was the appearance of certain stars. And believe me, even through the 18th century, it was when we were using stars to navigate our ships. Going into the turn of the 20th century, using stars to navigate your ships. Of course, we had compasses. But, think about this. You are relying on the positions of stars to position you on the surface of the planet, on the ocean. Well, for the ancient Egyptians and for other ancient cultures, like the Dogon, for example, classic story, it was the Dogon that basically migrated from Egypt and brought with them different cultural, dances and chants and a whole bunch of different things that indicated that they were from that particular culture. So that was what they did.
Okay. Now, what are some of the, well, actually, let me scroll down. I might see something in your description. And while I'm doing that, don't let me forget to mention to everybody once again that his website is www.ufomag.com. And he's got a magazine there you can sign up for. Now, is that magazine a paid subscription or a free one?
Well, we send out a free sample issue to anyone who signs up. You pay the postage of $2.50, and what we do is we will send you. We'll put a magazine in the mail for you, and then you can decide if you want to subscribe to the magazine based on the sample. Another real bargain for folks who like to read their magazines on their computers, their iPhones, their Androids, their iPads, tablets. Another thing we do is we will give you can buy a digital issue of the magazine for $2.50. So $2.50, half price of the regular magazine. You can buy your own digital edition every time it comes out. In fact, there's one coming up this week. The latest edition is going to be up on the website this week, and folks can buy it.
Okay. Now, also, I didn't mention this earlier, and it's getting a bit late to mention it now, which I've done this before. I got so wrapped up in talking to my guests that I forgot to, but just in case you got any last-minute callers out there, the call-in number is 832-632-7904. I don't know, sometimes we have more questions in chat than we do on the telephone anyway, so we'll wait and see what happens. And for those of you
No, I'm going to say, and for those folks who want to learn more about what's been happening with the story of the Phoenix Lights in Phoenix, Arizona, from 1997, on my radio show tonight, which is called Future Theater, which folks can find at www.futuretheater.com, you're having Dr. Ming Chitai, who made the very, very well-known documentary film, an award-winning documentary film on the Phoenix Lights. She's going to be on the show tonight, and folks can go to the show, join our chat, and basically ask her questions about the work she's done on the Phoenix Lights story.
And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned that, Bill, because as much as I didn't keep up with you, I was unaware that you had that radio show. And I've had Lynn Katai on my show before, and she's a wonderful guest, and I would really recommend any of you folks out there that you stop by and pay a visit to that and catch that show. And what time did you say that show was again?
In your central time zone, the show starts at 5 o'clock. 6 o'clock Eastern, 5 o'clock Central, 4 o'clock Mountain, and 3 p.m. on the Pacific Coast in the Pacific time zone. And our guest comes on at a half hour into the show. So in Central Time, it would be 5:30 Central Time, Central Daylight Time, when Lynn Chitai is coming on. You could listen to my wife Nancy and me talking on the air at 5 o'clock, and then at 5:30 Lynn Chitai comes on. So that's basically for folks who want to listen, we're on the air.
Okay, now May Gregg also said she's following you now on May Reed. I'm sorry, I'll get that one right one of these days, May Reed. I'm sorry, but she's following you now over on Twitter. She did that while we were talking. Now, also, folks, some of y'all are listening at Shoutcast and other locations. If y'all want to join the chat over here, it's www.paranormalpalace.com. And, Bill, we got about 10 minutes remaining, unless, of course, you'd like to extend and go a little further, or do you feel like we've covered? Huh?
No, I have to run in 10 minutes because we have to prep for our own show that's coming up in a couple of hours, right? So.
Oh, I know that feeling. I have to do a pre-show equipment test every time I do a show just to make sure there's no trouble.
I have to tell you, we have sometimes had, at the last minute, you're confident, you haven't changed one dial, one setting on anything, and then you go on the air and everything is all wacky and you can't figure out, did some gremlin get into your machines and change everything around? So, yeah, we normally do pre-equipment testing, and we'll play some music on the air for folks early, but we want to get everything set up for Lynn, and so we're going to start setting up soon. And then folks could join us basically at 5 o'clock Central and join the chat, because one of the things, we have a very, very active, wild and ferocious chat where people have a lot of questions and they want these questions answered, and we really, our guests are usually really good about that. They love to respond to questions from chat.
Okay. Well, Bill, since you're going to have to run to prep for that other show, have you got any last-minute thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Well, I just, the next book coming out in the Haunting of America series is The Haunting of 21st Century America, which really, it's funny. That book covers things that really excited me a lot in terms of when people talk about, what's been happening, is paranormal stuff still taking place? That stuff's really excited me because it's all about the discovery of remote viewing in the 20th century, in the late 20th century, and it's how the paranormal, and this really astounded me, how the paranormal was weaponized, how our intelligence agencies and the Army was weaponizing the paranormal in the late 20th century. And that's really fantastic. I mean, because one of the things that happened was that once our government discovered that the paranormal was real, that it was not some wacky, voodoo thing that crazy people were dealing with, but that people could actually do out-of-body experiences, travel to remote locations, spy on other people without actually being there. Once they discovered that, and then they discovered that there were members of the remote viewing community that were actually able to travel in time, when they discovered that, I have to tell you, they went bonkers, and they realized, what are we sitting with? And so the people who were doing this, remember, remote viewing is almost a kind of, almost but not quite, a spiritual event. In other words, you become aware as a remote viewer, even if for you it's like kind of like a mundane thing, you become aware that there's a whole other world out there which is not governed by the five senses.
Right.
And you discover something spiritual about this. And so I have to tell you, if you're taking that and you're doing that from the point of view of a weapon, that you're locating somebody who's going to be assassinated, unless you are very hard-hearted, it's a challenge to you to do. And so that is that was one of the things that the military also discovered about remote viewing and using things that were spiritual as weapons. And so that's in the book. That whole story, the story of Yuri Geller, the story of Yuri Geller's debates with James Randi, who was a big debunker and skeptic, and how those things played out and worked out in the media, how Johnny Carson, the very famous late-night talk show host, Johnny Carson, got involved in that. So it's actually pretty exciting. So it really deals with what happened to a lot of the paranormal and spiritual things that were taking place in late 20th century America into the 21st century. Not to mention, it deals a lot with how the Nazis used the paranormal in the early part of the 20th century to promote their idea of Aryan supremacy.
Okay. Now, I was going to tell you, Bill, before you had a chance to get out of here, that it's been an honor and a privilege to have you here. You've been a really fantastic guest, and I'm really kind of hoping that you'd be willing to come back again at some point in the future, maybe next time you got a new book out or something else going on, or maybe they're bringing UFO hunters back. I mean, I heard an interview between you and Whitley Strieber that kind of explained what happened with the UFO hunter show, but I'm thinking maybe another channel will pick it up or something.
Well, we're always hoping that another channel will pick it up. That's one of the things we do talk about UFO hunters. We talk about UFO hunters coming back in a different incarnation on another channel in a different format. And I can tell you that other channels are looking at it. Other people are looking at it. And Pat Uspert from UFO Hunters and I are always talking about doing some shooting. We are planning on doing some filming for some what they're called sizzle reels or demo reels. It's basically you're filming what you're scouting at various locations. So we're thinking of doing that as well. And then actually we're planning that. We have plans to do that later on when the weather gets a little warmer out here. So those are some of the things we're up to. So if one of those things does get picked up by one or more of the networks, one of the things we're talking about as well is starting our own channel on the internet and bringing that to cable. Ultimately, when we have channels fully formed, we have some people who are interested in helping us promote it and helping us build it.
I'd be put on the list to help you promote that, by the way.
Okay, well, that's what we're thinking about, and we're actually planning on doing a series of multi-networks under one umbrella for the paranormal, for UFOs, for a whole bunch of different things, with television shows and films and guests and things like that. And we're looking at really getting it underway as early as May in terms of getting our licensing and legal stuff together, and ideally having stuff going up before the end of the year. So that's something we're planning on doing.
Oh, cool. Then I'm going to try to see if I can have you back further in June or July to see if you made some progress on it, or maybe August if you're interested.
More than happy to do that.
Okie doke. Well, I guess in the meantime, I'm going to let you go prep for your show. I've really enjoyed having you here. I want to thank you for coming. It's been a privilege and an honor to listen to you, and your books sound really interesting, and I personally think I'm going to try to pick up both of them, actually, if I can get a hold of them.
Well, they're all available at Barnes & Noble, at Borders, and certainly from Amazon, both in print and digital editions. So if folks want to read it on their iPads or their Kindles or their Nooks, they certainly can read both books, or just order them from Amazon. They'll get to you in 24 hours.
Also, if y'all are interested, if you scroll down underneath his picture and his description, you'll see where I've got a copy of each linked over to Amazon. And if you're going to purchase it at Amazon anyway, hey, you click on it here from my site, I get a little percentage of it if you don't mind me getting a little plug-in for myself.
No, go ahead and you do that. We love when Amazon associates, because we're Amazon associates too, we love when Amazon associates link to our books, and you know, the more profit, the more percentage, the better for all of the folks in the paranormal and the UFO community. We totally encourage that. Wish other people would do that too, because believe it or not, the Amazon Associate Program is a brilliant thing that Amazon does. We think it's wonderful.
Well, and I'm not sure of this here, but I'm confident, I'll put it to you that way, that really and honestly, whether you click to it from our site, Bill's site, or from Amazon directly, the price of the book's going to probably be pretty much the same, because I think what they do is they make like a big, budget for the overall cost of advertising, and they just run it out from there, so it doesn't really change anything from book to book, in other words.
And I mean, the whole mechanism of book publishing, for the most part, is built on the fact that publishers send books to their distributors, to bookstores, basically, on a consignment basis. So if a book doesn't sell, the book comes back. So along the way, everybody is taking a percentage. The value of a company like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, okay, to the author is that there are no returns on books. If Amazon orders certain books, once you click to buy the book on Amazon, it's a sale. So they will stock as many books as they want, knowing that they're going to be very conservative. And as they run down on the number of books, as their inventory decreases, what they do is they will put up a notice on a website saying only 5 left, only 3 left. And at a certain point, they're going to order more. And until they come in, they won't take any orders. So you know that when you go to one of the online booksellers to buy a book, it's going to be there and you're going to get it. And that's one of the reasons why online bookselling has grown so quickly over the past 10 years, is that you get the book in 24 hours. You can now read part of the book online. You can see the book. You can read the introduction, read the first chapters, and it's really a good idea. So that's why, the prices stay the same, but the Amazon associates get a little percentage on books that sell.
Well, thanks for explaining that, Bill, because I had kind of a sort of an idea, but not a greatly detailed one. At any rate, like I say, I don't want to hold you up on your show because I don't want you to be late for it. But I do want to thank you for coming, and it's been a wonderful hour for me. I hope you've enjoyed it as well. I'm going to let you, however, like I say, go ahead and start testing out your equipment, and you have a good one.
I appreciate it. It was my pleasure, and I look forward to coming back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Okay. And good night. Okay, now, everybody, just want to remind y'all not to stop by and click on the links to the friends on the left and to the radio favorites, and I got some banners over there to radio shows that I recommend and to some of my friends with social networks that, we put in plugs for each other, to be honest with you, and I try not to get out of a show without mentioning some of these people live, like Alien and UFO Community. It's at alienandufocommunity.ning. There's Supernatural UFO at www.supernaturalufo.com. And then there's UnitedParanormalInternational.ning. So 2 of them are Ning networks, and they got chat rooms and forums and groups and everything you find over there, profiles, etc. Also, don't forget to check out some of my friends at other stations. UKPN Radio, Gary's the host. He's been on my show before. He's a great host. Jim Harold, well, he's been on my show, and everybody knows about the true stories around the campfire with Jim Harold. And everybody knows he's a fantastic host. And, well, of course, there's all of these here are great hosts, if you ask me, and about 3 of them has already been on my show. There's also the Micah Hanks with the Gralien Reports. And, Jim Harold and Micah Hanks are also authors that have their own books out. And then there's Ohio Politics, who is also a host over at Blog Talk Radio with me over there. So you want to stop by and give these folks a visit. And don't forget to pass my link around to other people, www.paranormalpalace.com. And, folks, I'm going to sign out and go ahead and start worrying about dinner. I want to thank you guys for coming. I couldn't have a show without you any more than I could have a show without my guests. And I never forget that. So, you guys, I'm going to say good afternoon to y'all. And y'all have a good one.